to First Baptist Church, Hazel. We're so glad you could be here. And you're looking good. Why don't we all stand up? We'll sing some praises. Get us moving here. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sins and my sorrows, he made them his very own. He bore the burden to Calvary and suffered and died alone, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. And with the ransomed in glory, his face I at last shall see, will be my joy through the ages, to sing of his love for me, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. Amen. You sounded kind of good, but I couldn't hardly hear you. You need to sing a little louder. But see, the folks back home, they got to hear you on their internet thing. That, whatever you call that thing. Did this dating service thing online once. Said I wanted somebody that was loyal and faithful and strong and hardworking, and my perfect match was a, now I can't even remember his name. I'll remember this by the time I go home. What is it? Not a Mormon, not a... Up there in the Northeast, what do you call them on the horse and buggies? Amish. My perfect match is Amish. How do you get an Amish online? This is a new one. I figured we needed a little Johnny Cash tonight. Last night I dreamed an angel came. He took my hand. He called my name. He bade me look
Thank you, Han. All right. Good to see everybody here tonight. Good group tonight. Turn in your Bibles to Joshua chapter 1. We're out of the Pentateuch now with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And now we move on, and we're in Joshua. I love the first two chapters of Joshua, and we're going to look at those tonight. Joshua chapter 2 has one of the most famous stories, or begins one of the most famous stories, and introduces us to the most interesting character, or one of the most interesting characters in the Bible. And we're going to find out a very important character as well. Joshua chapter 1. Turn there with me, chapter 1, verse 1. As you're turning there, by the way, I'm tempted to ask you the loaded question, who wrote Joshua? Yeah, we don't know who wrote Joshua. It doesn't say written by Joshua. Our best guess is Joshua, at least some of it. He probably didn't write the part after he died, but the bulk of the book is our best guess, is it was written by Joshua. And there's also the question of when was it written? Was it just orally shared, or was it written down initially? And we don't know the answer to those questions. I think Joshua is the best guess, though. Joshua chapter 1, remember we have just seen the death of Moses, and it is now time for God's people to move into the Holy Land. They're at the precipice. They're at the crossroads. They're going to fight or flight. And last time it was flight, and that cost them 40 years in the wilderness. And so tonight we see whether or not they fight or flight. Verse 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, and all the Hittite country to the great sea in the west. That's the Mediterranean. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Those are two great promises there at the end by God to Joshua and to all the people. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you, and I will never leave you or forsake you. Well, leaders don't lead forever. Even godly leaders like Moses. There comes a time in every ministry when God calls for a new beginning with a new generation and new leadership. Except for Joshua and Caleb, the old generation of Jews had perished during the nation's wanderings in the wilderness. And Joshua was commissioned to lead the new generation into a new challenge, entering and conquering the promised land. God buries his workmen, but the work goes on. It was God who had chosen Joshua, and everybody in Israel knew that he was their new leader. The question was, would they follow their new leader? So here in verse 6, we see this statement restated that was mentioned at the end of the speech of Moses. Verse 6 says, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Have you noticed something already? The amount of times that the name Moses comes up. I think there's a reason for that. It's an important transitional time. A wise leader doesn't completely abandon the past, but builds on it as he or she moves toward the future. Moses is mentioned 57 times in the book of Joshua. Even though he's already dead, his name is still mentioned 57 times. Evidence that Joshua respected Moses and what he had done for Israel. So verse 8, do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Now, God keeps repeating this over and over and over again because I think God is concerned for his people after they did what they did the last time they came to the Holy Land. He just keeps reminding them. I command you, he says, I command you to be strong and courageous. And by the way, it tells me that being strong and courageous is a choice because he commands them. He doesn't say, look, I know some of you, you're a big chicken, you've always been a chicken, and you'll always be a chicken. I know some of you tend to be fearful of everything, and you're just fearful, and you're always going to be fearful. He doesn't say that to them. He says to them and to you and I, we have a choice. And God expects us to be strong and courageous. That is, when everything else is falling apart in our world, and it is, there should be one group of people that are standing firm, that aren't cowering and that aren't sniveling and whining and terrified. Oh, it's all. We should be the ones that are strong and courageous. If not us, then who? God's people. So he says that again in verse 6 and verse 7. Verse 8, do not let, did I read this already? I'll read it again. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you to be strong and courageous? Yeah, I did read that a while ago. Do not be terrified. Again, when you're terrified, simply somebody telling you, don't be terrified, is a hard sell. Oh, okay, you said don't be terrified, but God clearly implies that we have a choice here. God's commandments are still God's enablements for those who obey him by faith. Gabriel's words to Mary are as true today as when he spoke them in Nazareth, for with God nothing shall be impossible. In the American Standard Version, it says it this way, for no word from God shall be void of power. The very word that God speaks has in it the power of fulfillment if we will trust and obey. In the years to come, whenever Joshua faced an enemy, and he did, and was tempted to be afraid, and I'm sure he was tempted, he would remember that he was a man of divine commission, and his fears would vanish. Whenever things went wrong and he was tempted to be dismayed, he would recall God's command and take new courage. All right, look with me in verse 10. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. 40 years before, at Kadesh Barnea, the nation had known the will of God but refused to obey it. Why? Because they believed the report of the 10 spies instead of believing the commandment of God and by following in faith. Had they listened to Caleb and Joshua, the minority report, they would have spared themselves those difficult years of wandering in the wilderness. There is a place in Christian service for godly counsel, but a committee report is no substitute for the clear command of God, and Joshua has been given the clear command of God, and it's time for the people to obey. Now, did you also notice something interesting? He doesn't give a command so much to prepare food. He doesn't give the command for Joshua to make a bunch of boats so they could get across Jordan, or a bridge to make it across Jordan. Did you notice that? These people have spent 40 years in the wilderness. They don't swim. This would be the deepest water they've ever been in. They're not swimmers. They're desert folk. But God does not tell them to make anything to accommodate their path across the water. Of course, you and I know that they're going to walk across on dry ground. There's no need. But they are to trust God. So God tells them to get ready, to prepare themselves. Pack up, pack your bags. We are about to move. He gives them a 3-day notice. And did you also notice that through Moses, there already was a very good organization to the nation? You're talking about millions of people here. To get word out to them required an organization of leaders and sub-leaders to go throughout the nation and tell everybody, and that's what they did. Verse 12. But to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. The Lord your God is giving you rest and has granted you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men, fully armed, must cross over ahead of your brothers. You are to help your brothers until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Remember, these were the tribes that said, hey, this looks pretty good to us. I think we'll just stay here before even crossing the Jordan. And remember that compromise that God said, okay, you can do that, but you're going to have to fight for your brothers in the Holy Land until it's conquered. And once all the Holy Land is conquered, then they can go back to their families. But so that's what he's talking about here. They were able to leave their families there, which was, I'm sure, convenient for them. They don't have to deal with that or worry about what's happening to their family. But they are going to be separated from their family for a while. Verse 16, then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Well, they didn't always obey Moses. So that's kind of a half promise there. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your words, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So they're ready to go. Lesson learned. It only took 40 years. Note that Joshua's words to his leaders were words of faith and encouragement. You shall pass over. You shall possess the land. The Lord will give it to you. And he made a similar speech, Joshua, 40 years earlier. Remember? Joshua and Caleb, the two spies that came back with a good report and said, we can do it. Only 40 years earlier, they actually talked about stoning them. They didn't like that report. And so now he gets a different response, and so that's good. It's unfortunate but true, and this is, I'm reading from the Bible Exposition Commentary. It says, it's unfortunate but true that sometimes the only way a ministry can move forward is by conducting a few funerals. A pastor friend of mine, he said, pleaded with his church board to build a new educational plant to house an exploding Sunday school. One of the longtime members of the board, a prominent businessman in the city, said to him, you'll do this over my dead body. And they did. A few days later, the officer had a heart attack and died, and the church moved ahead and built the much-needed educational plant. Well, that's literally what has happened to the Israelites. They had to have a whole lot of funerals for them to come to this point that they're ready to move forward. I'm so sad, by the way, if the best thing you can do for your church is die. That's not a very good way to go out, or a very good example or test of your faith in church. But the truth is, sometimes it is difficult. I am spoiled here, and your staff is a little bit spoiled because you guys have been so good to us. And we receive lots of comments and lots of suggestions, which we like. But we have not had any ugliness. And so thank you for that, by the way. I know Joshua was probably very relieved that the people said what they said to him. We're ready to go. We're strong and courageous. Let's go. All right, look with me in Joshua chapter 2. Do you have any questions or comments about Joshua chapter 1? Yes.
Verse 6, 7, and 9, is that addressed to Joshua or to the people? Because then you get an 18 where the people are really, I
Yes, and so that's my interpretation of this is, okay, I know verse 16 is the people responding to Joshua, yeah. So I think it's directed to Joshua, but also to everybody else, or through Joshua, he's to give the message. But clearly that's their response in verse 16. Anyone else? All right, Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. And this is really the heart of our story for tonight. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. Now, just a word, apparently the Israelites weren't very good at blending in. You know, I don't know how they were able to spot them so easily, but they immediately knew, hey, these are from out of town. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Now you notice a couple things here. First of all, Rahab lies. I mean, she covers for the men. Had they discovered the men there, what would have happened? Yeah, they would have killed them and they would have killed her immediately, and probably her whole family. She's taking a big risk here. There's no question. Also, well, I'll get to that in just a minute, but she's taking a big risk here. And she is keeping her word. She's going to keep her word, and the spies end up keeping their word, and so it all works out for her. Jericho was one of many city-states in Canaan, each one ruled by a king. So every city had their own king. The city of Jericho covered about 8 or 9 acres, and there is archaeological evidence that double walls, about 15 feet apart, protected the city. So Rahab's house was on the wall. The way they would do it in ancient cities is the walls were so thick they would actually build houses or have homes inside the wall, just built into the wall, kind of. And so apparently she had her house was next to the wall. So they went there, and you may be asking the question, why do they go straight to a prostitute? You know, men alone out of town. They go to a strange city, right to typically what they did is, this was like the Best Western. I guess it had extra services if you wanted the extra services, but if you wanted a hotel, those were the ones that kept rooms. And so that's likely why they were there. Okay. Jericho was a strategic city in Joshua's plan for conquering Canaan. I told you this, I think last week. Jericho is arguably the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. Now, there are some scholars that will make an argument for Damascus, but many think it was Jericho. So it is an ancient city and was a large fortified city at the time. After taking Jericho, Joshua would then cut straight across and divide the land, and then it would be much easier to defeat the cities in the south and then in the north. So Jericho was a strategic city. To bypass Jericho and start with other cities would not have made any sense. They would have ended up surrounding themselves with enemies. So they had to deal with Jericho right off the bat. All right, verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up, this is Rahab, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Now, let me stop just a moment. So, first of all, I have to think that the king's men came into her home and searched her home and probably went up on the roof and searched the roof. It just makes sense. I can't imagine he's going to take the word of a prostitute and say, oh, you say they're gone? Okay. They no doubt searched for the men, but she had them hidden so well that they were not found. Or she was just a really good liar, and they were convinced. Here, she immediately starts talking to the guys about why she decided to help them. And she says, we're terrified. Everybody's scared to death. She says, a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Now, I have little doubt that fear was alive and well 40 years prior, because she tells the same story they would have told a generation before. They've heard of Moses and well, let me just read it. Verse 10, we have heard of how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you've completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Well, we got a convert right there. She's confessing that there's only one God, and it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so verse 12, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Now, she is trying to save her family, which is an appropriate thing for anybody to want to do, to save her family. And I think she came to the logical conclusion, if I hide these guys and I'm caught, they're going to kill me and my family. But if I'm not caught, then they won't kill me and my family, and the Israelites maybe won't kill us either. Because she knew that these guys, because they had the one true God on their side, were going to wipe through Jericho, and everybody was going to die, including her and her family. So she knew she had no chance if she didn't help the Israelite spies, which is true, by the way. She and all of her family would have perished. And so she realizes, well, some chance is better than no chance, and I don't have any chance against these people's God. And so that's her explanation. So she pleads with them to give her a promise. Verse 14, our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. I find this funny. Do you know why? They say to her, all right, we'll make a deal with you. If you don't tell them what we're doing, the big plan, then it's okay. They didn't know what they were doing. They had no idea what the plan was. They had no idea they're just going to march around the city for 7 days and God's going to knock the walls down. They haven't got that far yet. So they don't really have a plan. Anyway, so I find that funny. He says, if you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. As if they were saying, all right, next Tuesday we're going to come in on the east gate. We're going to sneak in during the night, blah, blah, blah. And we have all these strategies. They had no strategy and no plan at all. God had a plan, they didn't. Verse 15, so she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. Now she had said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. The men said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If anyone goes outside your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. And so she didn't waste any time. She got that cord in the window, that scarlet cord, very quickly. Now here's an interesting thing, and again, I got this out of my commentary. The Hebrew word translated harlot can also mean one who keeps an inn, an innkeeper, because the prostitutes were also innkeepers. And this writer says, if all we had was the Old Testament text, we could absolve Rahab of immorality and call her the proprietor of an inn. But there is no escape, for in James 2:25 and Hebrews 11:31, the writers use the Greek word that definitely means a prostitute. It's remarkable how God, in His grace, uses people we might think could never become His servants. As Paul said, "But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not to bring nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in His presence." That's 1 Corinthians 1:27 through 29. Jesus was the friend of publicans and sinners, and He wasn't ashamed to have a former prostitute in His own family tree. I don't know, I'll talk about that in just a minute. Verse 22, "When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them." It's remarkable, when they left, they thought, she said wait 3 days. That could be a booby trap, so we're just going to wait 2 days and we're going to go. They did exactly what she told them to do, and she was right. She trusted them, and they trusted her, and it worked out. So they did exactly what she said, 3 days. And then verse 23, the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands, and all the people are melting in fear because of us." Now remember, Joshua is hearing this. Now Joshua is the one that brought out the good report 40 years earlier, and all the other spies said just the opposite. They terrified the Israelites, when in reality they didn't know, but probably everybody in the promised land was already melted with fear. And so everybody's afraid, not now. So they go back to Joshua and they say, "Hey, we're like legends here. Our God is a legend." They're terrified of us. Did you know that only 2 women are personally named in Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of Faith? Remember, Hebrews 11 is that great faith chapter. It just gives illustration after illustration of faith throughout the Bible and people who had great faith. And Rahab's name is one of 2 women that are mentioned. Sarah, the wife of Abraham, is mentioned in verse 11, and Rahab, the harlot, is mentioned from Jericho in verse 31. Sarah was a godly woman, the wife of the founder of the Hebrew race, and God used her dedicated body to bring Isaac into the world. But Rahab was an ungodly Gentile who worshiped pagan gods and sold her body for money. Humanly speaking, Sarah and Rahab had nothing in common. But from the divine viewpoint, Sarah and Rahab shared the most important thing in life. They both had exercised saving faith in the true and living God. Faith is really important to God. Not only does the Bible associate Rahab with Sarah, but in James chapter 2, verse 21, it also associates her with Abraham. James used both Abraham and Rahab to illustrate the fact that the true saving faith, that true saving faith always proves itself by good works. It was what she did that illustrated her sincere faith. She didn't earn any kind of salvation, but she did demonstrate that she had faith. But there's more. The Bible associates Rahab with the Messiah. Did you know that? When you read the genealogy of the Lord, of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 1, you find Rahab's name listed there in verse 5, along with Jacob, David, and other famous people in the Messianic line. She has certainly come a long way from being a pagan prostitute to being an ancestress of Jesus himself. Paul says in Romans chapter 5, verse 20, but where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. And that is the case with Rahab. But keep in mind that the most important thing about Rahab was her faith. It's the most important thing about any person, you or I. For without faith, it is impossible to please God. Back to Hebrews 11, that's verse 6. Not everything that is called faith is really true faith, the kind of faith that is described in the Bible. So what kind of faith did Rahab have? She had genuine faith. She wasn't a theologian. She was a prostitute. She wasn't a scholar. She wasn't highly educated. She was just simply somebody who clearly believed that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or more specifically in her context, the God of Moses, was someone who was far more powerful than her or anyone in her city. And she was willing to do anything to follow him. And so she is remembered throughout all of history as one of the great people of faith. That tells me that it doesn't matter who you are or I. I mean, we're all going to be dead in a few years anyway, give or take a few decades. It's a short life. I've always said this, I've said this before. If I ask any of you to raise your hand and tell me any previous pastors of First Baptist Church of Azle, I'm not sure anybody in the room, is there anybody here that can tell me one pastor before me? Now, First Baptist Azle is 118 years old. It's had many pastors. So you don't remember any of them. And I can tell you that almost every one of them that was standing where I'm standing, or standing in whatever pulpit we had at the time, thought that they were really legendary status there. Everybody would remember their name. And I know a lot of churches have a famous hallway, where they have all these old black and white pictures of pastors. We don't even have that here. We got one pastor, and I don't even know his name. He's pictured with the original 61 building that was across the street, and that's upstairs, but nobody, I don't think anybody remembers his name. I say it to say there will come a time, if the earth is here long enough, and it won't take too long, if anybody in this whole congregation says the name Lee Sipe, not one person will know who that is. And I'm okay with that. I'll be in heaven receiving my reward. If everybody remembers me, but I was a phony, I had no faith, it's all for nothing. This is not a democracy in the kingdom. And so I'm here and you're here to please one person and one person only, and that is your Savior. And that's what's eternal. That's what lasts. And that's how famous people from her day are not remembered. 99.99% of everybody goes through history is completely forgotten. But here, a common, uneducated prostitute is known throughout all of history in the Bible as a person of great faith, because her faith was genuine and true. All right, any comments or questions before we end our Bible study?
Well, one thing I want to say about that is we don't remember her name because of her great faith so much as the great things that God was able to do because of her faith.
Yes, that's correct. And by the way, the story isn't over. Come back next week and you'll find out what happens, although you probably already know. But that's true, Larry. Thank you.
And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that's what I love about the Bible. It takes David, who's actually a murderer, and it shows the mercy of God.
Yeah.
And the great things that God can do with us, flawed human beings.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's the beautiful part of the story that we still remember from David.
Right. That's exactly right. David is a perfect example. Yeah. All right, let's conclude there, and we'll begin in Joshua chapter 3 next Wednesday. And if you would take